Today we have again long case for discussion. And last time in the last session, which was the first session, what we did was we basically discussed the ischemic heart disease long case, and our focus was basically on the details of the history. And today we'll go through the actual history of a patient. We have a candidate who is appearing in the current exam. He has prepared, we have given him a case today in the morning, and he has prepared the history. He will present the history, and after that we will have cross questioning on that long case. And today our main focus would be we'll pass the history quickly, and then we'll present the investigations of this case. That includes his ECG as well as his angiographic film. And you will be shown, and the candidate will be shown the angiographic film, and then we will have a detailed discussion on the management of that patient. So basically, our today's long case would focus more on the management, interpretation of the angiogram, and how we can make a decision and how we can defend that decision. So today we have our candidate with us, and he will let him introduce himself, and then he will present history. Will roughly take 6 or 7 minutes in presentation of that history.
Hello, my name is Dr. Hassan Kazim, and I'm going to present you a case of ischemic heart disease. The patient Muhammad Yaqub, son of Bashir Ahmed, 68-year-old male, resident in Narwal, currently at Punjab Institute of Cardiology, on 25th of chest pain for the last 7 days. My patient, he's an ex-smoker of 25 years history of smoking. He's a known case of COPD diagnosed 1 year back is on active inhalers. He was in his usual state of health 10 days back when he suddenly developed sudden chest pain, which was squeezing in nature and progressively increasing, radiating to both jaws and the shoulder. And while he was doing his normal household work activity at 10 a.m. in the morning. The pain was not changed with any respiration movement or any posture or any palpation. There was no prior history of any immobilization or orthopedic surgery, or the pain did not radiate to the back. There was no history of prior fever. He called his neighbor who took him to a local GP by a rented car. The pain continued for about 2 hours, and he was given 3 injections by his local GP, but the pain did not resolve. So he was taken to Sahara Hospital in Narwal, private hospital in Narwal, where initially an ECG was done, and he was told that he was having a major heart attack. He was given some oral medications, and then he was given an IV injection, which the patient called that it costed him about 5,000 rupees. The IV injection had continued for about 30 minutes, and 20 minutes after, when the IV injection had subsided, the pain completely resolved. He was then admitted in the private hospital and remained stable throughout the admission. He was chest pain free. There was no history of any shortness of breath or apnea, PND, or syncope or lightheadedness during the admission. But he was in restricted mobility during his stay. After 3 days, he was discharged from the hospital, and 2 days after, in his home, where he was very compliant with the medications, he again developed the same chest pain, which was waxing and waning and mild in character. And he again went to the same GP who referred him to Punjab Institute of Cardiology. He came to Punjab Institute of Cardiology in the next 3 hours by a rented car, where initially an ECG was done, and then he was given some tablets and some sublingual tablet and a subcutaneous injection in his abdomen. 20 minutes after admitting him in the emergency department, the pain was completely relieved. The patient was then admitted yesterday in the CCU ward, and he was told that he had a major heart attack 1 week back, and now having the same angina pain due to his heart attack, and his angiography is being planned. During his hospital stay of 1 day, he is completely chest pain free. There is no history of any shortness of breath or apnea during his stay. His past history includes that he is hypertensive for the last 1 year and is on oral medications, the name of which the patient does not remember, but he says that he monitors his blood pressure monthly through his private GP practitioner. There is no history of any stroke or any acute hypertensive emergency. There is no history of any oliguria or any blindness. He is a known case of COPD, which was diagnosed by his local GP. Although the workup, he does not remember what workup was done, but he is on 2 inhalers, one of which he takes a capsule in his inhaler and takes twice daily. He has a history of bilateral cataract operation, which was done about 2 years back, and he has a history of hemorrhoids, which were operated under local anesthesia about 25 years back. His social history includes that he was an ex-smoker and he stopped his smoking 1 year back when he was diagnosed with COPD. And he has a 25-year history of smoking. He took half-pack cigarette of smoking for about 40 years. There is no history of any illicit drug abuse. The drug history, he does not remember the name of his hypertensive drugs or his COPD drugs, and there is no history of any Hakim medications. There is no history of any allergies. In systemic inquiry, he does experience shortness of breath for the last 2 to 3 years while climbing one set flight of stairs, but on level ground, he can walk at slow pace at about 2 to 3 kilometers, which he walks daily before having this heart attack. There is history of mild cough or mild sputum occasionally, but no history of any PND or orthopnea. There is no history of any limb weakness or any history of gastrourinary complaints. His family history includes his father having died after having chest pain at the age of 70 years, and there is no other significant family history of sudden cardiac death in the family. He is married with 6 daughters and have 6 daughters and have 2 sons. His sons are breadwinners of the family, and he lives in his own home in Narwal. And his dietary habits, he reports that his dietary habits are healthy, and he takes his home, food cooked in his home. On examination, my patient is an elderly gentleman who is well oriented in time, space, and person, and was well cooperative throughout the history and examination. His heart rate was 65 beats per minute, which is regular, normal pulse corrective, and there was no radiofemoral delay. His BP was 120/80. He was afebrile. His respiratory rate was 14 per minute. There was no signs of any pallor, jaundice, cyanosis, or edema, though there was arcus cineris in his eyes. In cardiovascular examination, the apex beat was, his thorax was normal in shape. The apex beat was undisplaced in the 5th intercostal space. In the midclavicular 9, the S1 and S2 were normal in character and intensity at their respective places. There were no added sound murmurs. In the respiratory examination, he had bilateral V's, inspiratory V's in his middle zones, and the vocal femorals were bilaterally equal and normal. There were no other significant findings in his chest examination. The abdomen was soft and non-tender. In the neuro examination, there was no significant findings.
Okay, thank you. I would request that you summarize the ECG, elaborate the ECG findings, and then summarize your case in 5 or 6 lines.
So my patient is a 68-year-old male, elderly man with known case of hypertension for the last 1 year, which is well controlled on medications, and known case of COPD for the last 1 year, which is controlled on inhalers. And he has a 20-pack history of smoking and is currently now an ex-smoker, quitted 1 year back. Now he presented with an acute chest pain, which was which has a history of typical of acute coronary syndrome. And after being admitted in a private hospital for 3 days, he was discharged. And after 2 days after the discharge, he again developed the same pain and brought back to the emergency Punjab Institute of Cardiology with the same chest pain. His ECG.
So we like to sit together so that you can have a view of examiner as well as the candidate together. Let us see if we can try to maintain a little bit of social distancing, not that much. Okay. Okay, so you would summarize the ECG findings, please.
So this was an ECG of an elderly male, 68-year-old, taken on 24th of August 2020 at 2 p.m. in the emergency department of Punjab Institute of Cardiology, and it was showing normal sinus rhythm with a rate of 70 beats per minute with normal access. And the significant findings in the ECG were that there were ST elevations in the length of 2-3 AVF, which were 1 millimeter, and there was mild reciprocal changes in 1 in AVL, especially depression in 1 in AVL, and there was no other significant changes.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to bring the camera closer. Okay, thank you, Dr. Awais. So it was a well elaborated history, especially in the case with ischemic heart disease. You have after the biodata and presenting complaint, you have on systemic inquiry, you have to rule out other causes of chest pain, especially like in this case, the chest pain, its characteristics, associated features, aggravating relieving factors, and systemic inquiry to rule out other causes of chest pain like pneumothorax and pulmonary embolism. They were very well elaborated. So in your history of long case, if the patient is presented with chest pain, you should always rule out if there are life-threatening condition, including MI, and after that pulmonary embolism, pneumothorax, and aortic dissection. And you should always, even if you are sure that this is a patient with typical general chest pain, even then you should, on your system inquiry, if the patient is stable, you should always ask questions to rule out other life-threatening conditions. For example, even in a young patient presenting with chest pain who has an aortic dissection can also have a concomitant inferior wall ST elevation MI. So your history should be very much elaborate. So that's good. I have certain 1 or 2 comments as well. You can also write your comments in the inbox, and we can, read those, and we can also come back to your questions as well. So it's good that you mentioned that initially where your patient presented, you mentioned the name of that hospital, and later on where he again represented the second time, you again mentioned the name of those hospitals. There's no hard fast rules, but it's okay if you mention the names, all right. Otherwise, you can mention if the patient is treated at a periphery hospital, you can mention that he was treated at a primary healthcare facility or a secondary healthcare facility. And if patient presents to an institute like PIC or other major institute, you can tell that he presented at a dedicated tertiary care cardiology center. That's also reasonably nice. Okay, rest of the things were okay. So I would like some questions. You mentioned his history of smoking and COPD. So one pertaining question, which is very commonly asked in the exam, is what's ex-smoker? What's the criteria?
So the definition of a smoker is that if the patient has smoked about 5 packs in his lifetime. And an ex-smoker definition is that at least 7 days, which is short term, and at least 6 months for abstinence of smoking, which is needed to label a patient as an ex-smoker.
Okay. So thank you. All of you should know these definitions of smoker, ex-smoker, and current smoker. Current smoker, even if the patient is smoking 1 cigarette every day, you will label him current smoker. Okay. So regarding another question was raised during the history. You mentioned the patient's family history. So how you label a positive family history for ischemic heart disease in any case?
So if the first degree relatives have a history of heart disease, in males, if less than 65 years of age, and in females in males less than 55 years of age, and in females less than 65 years of age. If the first degree relative have a history of any ischemic heart disease, then it's positive family history.
So that's good. You always ask the question of positive family history in the close family members, parents, siblings. And the important thing is age cutoff, that is 55 years for males and 65 years for females. If the ischemic heart disease before that, if the patient's parents or father has a history of ischemic heart disease at the age of 70, so probably that's not clinically that much relevant, although you can mention that his father had a history of ischemic heart disease or MI or death due to cardiac issue at the age of 70. So you can elaborate that in detail. Okay, now we'll show you. Basically, in the last session, we had a detailed discussion on the history, what the type of angina, what are the types of MI, and other questions regarding history, like there is one question in the chat which has been raised. If we have time, we'll discuss in the end, like how you differentiate pneumothorax patient presenting with chest pain and how you. So okay, I can briefly answer. In patient who present with chest pain and has an underlying pneumothorax, he definitely have a history of shortness of breath, hypoxemia, and on examination there will be absent or very reduced breath sound. There might be tracheal shifting. So on history and examination, you can confidently rule out life-threatening conditions of like a pneumothorax. The more difficult things to rule out are their pulmonary embolism. Again, in pulmonary embolism, the chest pain can be mimicking ischemic heart disease, but the patients are always dysleep, tachycardic, hypoxemic, and there's underlying background, history in which the patient has a predisposing factor like immobilization or use of OCP or some things. So in those patients, we suspect pneumothorax. And the other fourth cause, life-threatening, which is aortic dissection. In those cases, the pain can be more on the back, in the interscapular region. It can be like piercing with a knife. And again, these patients might be having dyspnea as well, but mostly they present with severe chest pain. And these patients are relatively younger than the patient who present with MI. Okay, now very quickly, today our main focus will be on decision making, how you interpret the angiographic film and how you make your decision. From now onwards, our camera will be on the angiographic film and you will be able to listen to our discussion, but you will also be able to see the film discussion. I think we might face one problem, that this image is left and right. Can we change the screen setting? We can twist left and right and not. Notice that? With the camera, we have an inverted image. I don't think we'll be able to do that. This is only. So let us arrange it for you. Let us see how we can fix it. Now you can see the screen in a proper view. So that's intelligent thinking by Dr. Avas. You should be well familiar in running the Excalibur or your CD on the laptop when you are in the exam. Like, okay, Avas, I will show you this angiographic film. I hope the other audience, they are also able to see that, and then you have to summarize your findings and will highlight if there are any flaws in the presentation. Okay. So what are the findings? This is the angiographic film of our current patient.
So this is the angiogram of patient Mohammed Yaqub, which is showing that initially the left vein is a large scalable vessel, short left vein with bifurcation with no significant disease. The LAD is a moderate to large scalable vessel, which has mild mild to moderate proximal disease and mild luminal irregularities throughout the vessel, but no significant disease. And the left circumflex is a moderate to large caliber vessel, which also has mild proximal disease, but no significant lesion is being shown here. There are collaterals going from the LED towards the RCA from from the left to right system, and the right system is engaged by a Judkins right catheter, which is showing total proximal occlusion of the vessel.
Okay. So that's good. While presenting the angiographic film, you always remember if patient name is known, okay, all right, you mention the name, the age, the date of that angiographic film. And after that, if one view is being presented, like in this case, only one view is being shown to you currently, then you have to mention in detail about that view. If entire of the angiographic film is presented, then you have to summarize entire of the angiographic film. You have to mention, first of all, the access, that means radial or femoral. Then you have to mention which catheter are being used, number 2. Number 3, you have to mention entire of the left system and the right system, any disease in any of the arteries, any collateralization, any intraluminal presence of thrombus or dissection. If the LV angiogram is done in certain cases, you have also then to mention the finding of the LV angiogram. So overall, your description was good, but you have to mention that Zudical left and right catheter was used. You only mentioned Zudical right. If an entire of the angiographic film is shown and 2 catheters are used, you mention those catheters. You also mentioned the route, which route is being used. Okay, now we will all of us focus on this specific view. As you have seen, the left vein circumflex is normal, the left anterior descending artery shows mild disease. The patient had an inferior MI, and our main focus is right coronary artery. So look at this view and summarize in detail this view. And then we'll also ask about the management decision in this case.
So this is the LEO view of the right coronary artery, and the right coronary artery is engaged via Judkins right catheter. It is moderate to large caliber vessel, and is completely occluded proximally.
Okay. So why you mentioned how you know that this is LA view? Why not AP view? Why not RA view? Why not cranial view?
So the spine is present on the left side of the screen.
Okay. Why not cranial or caudal?
So in the cranial view, we will see that the diaphragm is covering more than 2/3 of the screen.
Okay. So the diaphragm is coming up in this view.
Yes.
Anyways, so that's good. The spine in the horizontal plane goes with the camera. So you draw an imaginary midline and in the screen, and if the spine is on the left side, this is the LA view. If the spine is between midline and the right border, then this is an AP view. And if the spine is just touching the right edge of the screen, or the spine is not visible, so then that's an RA view. And regarding cranial and caudal, you take help of the position of the diaphragm. And in cranial views, your diaphragm, the diaphragm again goes vertically in the same direction in which the camera is going. So in the caudal view, you will see the diaphragm that is in the lower 1/3 of the screen, and in cranial views that is in upper 1/3 or even touching the upper border of the screen. And in the plane LEO views, it would be in middle part of the screen. So basically, it's a LEO view, slightly cranial angulation is also present in this case, but it's not a full LEO cranial view. It is alio with slight cranial angulation, but even if you say alio, we are okay. So there are ways to assess the views by the help of the coronary artery as well. But if the coronary artery is totally occluded, that's a soft landmark. So that does not help you anymore, like in this case. So the hard landmarks, which are spine and diaphragm, should be used to defend your cranial caudal angulation and projection. So that's good. Now you have described this lesion. So basically in the exam, I would summarize for the candidates that most of the ACS patient, they would have single or multiple cell disease, but usually have in STEMI patients, you will find that on angiographic film, there is usually a total occluded one of the artery. Like if the inferior wall MI is there, in this case, you find a total occluded RCA. So our questions today from our candidate were based on this. This is a total occluded artery, so you should be able to differentiate an acute total versus chronic total occlusion, number one. And you should practice on 3 or 4 models of the angiographic disease. One is acute total occlusion, second is chronic total occlusion, third is multivessel disease, fourth is left main disease, and fifth one is bifurcation lesions. So there are other entities as well, like spontaneous coronary artery dissection or things like that. But these 4 or 5 basic patterns of the disease, you should be able to identify and defend the decision making in your cases while you are assessing, analyzing presenting your long case and analyzing your angiographic film. So we will like to go with this case. So how you label this lesion? It's an acute total occluded or CTO.
So as the history of the patient predates to about 1 week back. So clinically, seeing this, it's an acute lesion. Angiographically, there isn't much calcification seen, and the collateral network is not so strong here. So I will think that it is an totally acutely, it's as it was acute total occlusion. So I think it's an acute event.
Good. So that's an ATO. That's acute total occluded. So your answer is correct. So what's the definition of CTO then?
So it's a completely total occlusion of a vessel which is more than 2 months.
Okay. All right. 100% occlusion of an artery and the duration is more than 2 months. So you define CTO on the basis if your history is there, if you know the index event, if you have an ECG and patient history, if the patient had an event which is in the last 2 months and ST elevation MI most of the time, so that is on the basis of history. So you can define a totally occluded artery and the history is less than 2 months. If you do not know the history, then the other parameters are helpful, and the most important parameter is if the patient has well developed collaterals on angiographic film and you do not know the index event, that when the MI happened, you only have the angiographic film, the presence of well developed collaterals, they are a sign of a chronic total occlusion. Okay, so that's how you differentiate between an ATO and CTO, and we will show you the film, another film in which we will see that how we differentiate from an ATO and a CTO. Like in this case, there are no very well developed collaterals. Moreover, you can also see if you concentrate on this area, the occluded segment, you see that there is visible thrombus as well. You can see over here. So where the artery is occluded, there is a visible thrombus over here. So there is one question on the chat whether there is a history of MI more than 3 months, then that's a CTO. Previously, the CTO, like in the European guidelines, they of 2000, I think it was 4. I have one article in which that definition has been elaborated of CTO. They used it the duration of 3 months, but for the last 7 or 8 years, now the current definition is 2 months. So the 3 months definition is old in the exam. You should use the 2 months criteria. And on angiographic film, if a visible thrombus like this, like in this case, is present, then that's again a sign of acute closure of a vessel. So how would you manage this case? Then we'll also show you another case in which we'll have a brief discussion and description of the CTO as well. So how will you manage this case?
Well, the patient is clinically having, after the index event, he is still having angina. So I would like to open this vessel.
So what parameters or what precautions or how you would proceed in your procedure to make it more successful?
So initially, I would like to
quickly summarize your procedure. Your patient is there in the CCU and you are there in the cath lab and you want to shift to the cath lab. How will you prepare and how will you proceed on this?
So I would first take the consent of the patient and the family if they're willing for the procedure, and then have this check the pre-angio list in which all the parameters, for example, should know all the CBC of the patient, whether the patient is having, if the patient is having low HB, whether he can tolerate DAB. If he is having low platelets, then I would like to see his creatinine and the serum electrolytes. Whether after the index angiography he had any element of contrast-induced nephropathy. And then ideally, as the patient has an acute occlusion and if his Allen's test is intact, I would like to proceed to the radial route. The patient JR catheter should suffice and for the angiography. I would like to use a floppy wire initially to guide and go through the lesion, and then through combined balloon, I would like to pre-dilate the lesion and see the flow of the artery. And then I would like to and see that how the lesion reacts, whether if it's and see the thrombus burden and to see the extent of the lesion, and then decide via the balloon or the tip of the wire the length of the lesion, and then stent the lesion.
Okay, so you mentioned that you would take a floppy wire, a soft wire first. If that does not cross, then what will you do? If the floppy wire does not cross your knee, what will you do?
I will like for an polymer wire in this patient.
Okay. In most of the cases of acute MI, we use one-part wires like BMW or Sion, and if it does not pass through, then we can take some soft polymer jacket wire. Okay. You mentioned about compliant balloon. Up till that, it's okay. But usually, in such cases with acute MI, you do not pre-dilate the balloon. Okay. So you gently dilate with a compliant balloon because there is just thrombus burden. You have to dilate it to make some antegrade flow and to see that kind of a lesion. Would you like to use GP2B3 inhibitors or not in this case?
So depending upon the flow which I get after opening the lesion, after first ballooning the lesion, I would like to see the flow and to see the thrombus burden in this patient. And if the patient thrombus burden is huge, then I would like to have GP2B3.
All right, like in this case, we have seen that there is a significant thrombus sitting in the fluid segment we have already seen. So it's good to use IVGP2B3 inhibitors after you have taken the excess and you have given the heparin. In this case, you can do that. So suppose actually intervention is, I don't think it's currently, we have the CD of intervention in this case. So otherwise we would have been shown. So most of the discussion on this case from now onward is or most of like a theoretical discussion. So what's the role of pivalirodin?
So it can be used during angiography, and there was a trial, activity trial, in which they compared unsaturated heparin plus 2B3 inhibitors versus pivalirodin, and it showed equal ischemic benefit and less bleeding, especially in older patients.
So what do you think, if it's available, is it preferred over heparin or not?
So the usual practice is with the unfractionated heparin, and the ACT can also be equally measured with infected heparin. So heparin is preferred there.
Heparin generally performs very well, but if Vivality is available, so you can choose that. So one thing you also mentioned that if on the history you ruled out any contraindication to DAPT. So suppose if your patient has a higher risk of bleeding, so which parameter, how you can objectively assess, what tool you have to objectively assess the risk of bleeding in your patient, and how you can assess that if you want to start him on DAPT, so for how long you would proceed. What's the standard duration of DAPT? What's the standard duration?
So the standard duration of DAPT after an acute ACS is about 12 months.
12 months. So in certain patients, you can decide whether you have to go up to less than 12 months or more than 12 months. How you can assess that?
So by calculating the DAPT score can be used here to assess the risk of bleeding in this patient.
Okay. In one presentation, I think we showed or shared the DAPT score. One is precise DAPT score and one is DAPT score. Precise DAPT score can be used initially on initial presentation to know or to estimate the duration of the DAPT. And if the patient is having a test, what's the minimum ideal duration of DAPT? That is 12 months. But if the bleeding risk is higher, so how much we can minimize the duration of DAPT?
6 months can have to be given for 6 months.
And if the bare metal stent is there?
So for 1 month.
Good. So current guidelines say that if the patient has some bleeding event or has a high risk of bleeding, or you want to do a surgery which is elective, so after bare metal at least 1 month and after that at least 6 months. Okay. So is there any questions from the other participants or attendees? If there are no questions, then we can move on to our next CD. We already discussed that this patient is having an acute total occlusion, and we have another patient which we'll show you, and that will help us differentiate and compare an ATO and a CTO. So as I will show you the CD to you, and you have to describe this one as well.
So this is the LA view, which is showing the right coronary artery, which is conveyed by a rectum right catheter, and it is a moderate caliber vessel.
Okay.
It is a moderate caliber vessel which has a moderate disease proximally followed by a total occlusion, and it fills antegrade via some branches before the occlusion, and it is linked after the occlusion. And the distal vessel has TME2 flow.
Okay, so how you define basically this lesion? How you label this lesion in one word?
So it's a CTO also has classification also.
Okay. So although the resolution is not that excellent in this case, but you can see this is a right coronary artery engaged with the Judicial rights, and you can see this descending limb of Castor. This is a femoral root, and over here there is a mild to moderate disease in the proximal RCA, followed by total occlusion of the mid RCA. From here to here, this is the missing segment, and you can see this very well developed tortuous collaterals over here and over here. So these are the collaterals. We do not really know the history in this patient, Again, there is a moderately tight exclusive over here as well after the the RV branch. But in this case, angiographically, you can see that there is a total occlusion with missing segment and presence of very well developed collateral. So all these are feature of a CTO, chronic total occlusion. So this is following the angiographic criteria. So if you have to proceed in this case, so I will have questions from you on this specific case that how would you proceed? If you have already a femoral access and this is a symptomatic patient, you want to perform intervention on the RCA of this patient, and this is a CTO and the left system is normal, the LV function is good, but the patient is symptomatic on maximum medication. So you have already a femoral access. So which guide you will select? So I will ask the questions one by one, and you will answer those questions.
I would like to guide of AL.
Okay, so good means you need to have a guide with good backup. So JR would not work in this case. You need pushability of wire and balloons and other devices. So that's the reason you need to have a extra backup guide of the RCA that can be XB-RC or that can be AL plus left. So these are good guides for extra backup. Which wires you will take in this case?
So the polymer coated wires, because we are doing a dedicated CTO here.
Okay, there are some questions on the chat. That's good that the people are interacting. And after the end of this discussion on this CTO, we would come back to those questions. There are some questions on the previous case of Q total occlusion. And at the end, if we have all the questions of the ATO and CTO, will answer those questions on one. Okay, so again, sorry to come back to this case. Which wire you will take?
So the polymer coated wires.
Okay, how many types of wire are used in intervention of the CTO?
Sir, actually, all the three wires can be used. A floppy wire, the interventions they think that the CTO can be crossed with a floppy wire, normal workers or secondly, the polymer coated wires are best for CTOs as they can channel through the lesion, and the heavy wires can also be used like that if the lesion is not crossed through the polymer coated wire.
So basically, there are three types of wires which we use while doing intervention on the in any patients. There are floppy wires, the polymer jacket wires, and the third one are the stiff wires. So these are basic three classifications. There are other ways to classify as well, but in the exam you should know this. If a patient has a clear-cut CTO with a missing segment and platters like in this case, or calcification, then the role of floppy wire that is out. So in ATO, you can take floppy wire as the first, but in CTO, floppy wire almost has negligible or no role most of the times. Some interventionists still go in a stepwise fashion and they take workhorse wire while with support of the balloon or microcatheter while performing CTO. But if your lesion is like this, like in this case, very well developed collaterals, very well developed tortuous collateral channels, then the role of floppy wire is out. You have to then select between polymer jacket and stiff wire. Polymer jacket wires you only take when there is true communication between the proximal and the distal vessel through the missing segment. When the true channels are there, like in this case, these are tortuous collaterals. You can see they are called bridging collaterals. If a true relatively straight channel is present, which is connecting the proximal and the distal segment like this, then in that case, you can take a polymer jacket wire so that the polymer jacket wire can drag through that true channel and cross from the proximal to the distal true lobe. In only those cases, you will take a polymer jacket wire. The commonly used one are the pilot or fielder FC, fielder HT. These are the common polymer jacket wires. If bridging collaterals, tortuous bridging collateral like in this one, they are present, then that means over here there is a total occluded stump and two channels are not there. So in these cases, you have to select a stiff wire. So remember in CTO, if true channel is present, take a polymer jacket wire. If true channel is not present, take a stiff wire. That's how you select your wire. And in stiff wires, there are certain wires like Crossit, like Miracle, like Gaia series. So these are the stiff wires, and these help to penetrate and puncture from the proximal cap and then go into the distal true lumen. So these are some of the criteria to select between polymer jacket and stiff wires. So this is the basics of that, and you should know names of at least 2 or 3 wires in each category. So after the wire, what additional equipment you will take in a CTO, like in a total union? After passing the wire, you use a balloon, but in CTO, which additional equipment is really necessary?
So microcapacitors would be
very good. So microcasters, they are commonly needed and they are used in CTO. So we would like to name some commonly used microcasters.
Corsair, Caravel.
Good. Caravel is a commonly used microcaster. Fine Cross is another one. Corsair is being used, and it's mostly used in cases of the retrograde CTO interventions. So, what's the dual injection and what's its role in current management of the CTO part of the guidelines?
So, if the patient is having collaterals in the in the left system, then the left system is also engaged via radial or the femoral route. And then while injecting the RCA, then after a time when the RCA fails, then the left system is also injected with the contrast to see the limit of the lesion and how well the collaterals are going to.
So what's its role in current management of the CTS?
Sir, it's basically recommended for.
Good. So in the current standard management protocols or intervention, the CTO dual injection is mandatory. So you take 2 access like right radial and right femoral, or bifemoral, or sometimes biradial. You take 2 access, and if you are intervening on an RCA, like in this case, you have also to take injection from the left system as well, and you have to see the collateralization of the distal vessels. This is very much important if the artery is not being filled antegradally and its filling is only from the retrogradally from the other system. Like in our case, we see that we have antegrade collateral which are filling the distal segment of the RCA. So we can, live with only a single injection from this side, but if the distal vessel is not being visualized, then the collateral injection from the other side is mandatory. And another thing is when we intervene on this RCA after the start of the intervention, sometimes these bridging collaterals, they get occluded during intervention. So again, your visibility of the distal vessel is lost. Again, the contralateral access and injection would come to your rescue in those cases. So how you assess the difficulty of performing CTO? Is there any objective scoring system?
Yes, sir. The GACTO scoring system can be used.
Okay, there are 3 or more scoring systems which are used to assess the difficulty or success of a CTO, and the commonest one is JCTO. So, what parameters are there in the JCTO?
So, firstly, we see whether the lesion stump is blunted or have a hesitated to go through. Secondly, the degree of calcification, the length of the lesion if it's more than 20. Then whether there is previous attempt to do this lesion, and the angle within the CTO if it's more than 45 degrees.
So that's called tortuosity. So if these are the 5 parameters, and if any one of these parameters is present, the 1 score is given, and the total maximum score is 5. And what's the difficulty level? How much score is difficult, and how much is easy?
So 0 is very easy, and more than 3 is very difficult.
Good. So more than 3 equal to, or more than 3 is very difficult. 2 is difficult. 1 is intermediate, and 0 is easy. So would you apply JCTO on this patient?
Yes, sir. I would like to objectively see this lesion so that I can inform the family about the success rate of the.
So what's the JCTO in this patient? in this RC. So the missing segment is less than 20. The proximal cap is blunt, relatively blunt, I would say. So to me, it's not tapered because it's the tapering is ending actually into a side branch or a collateral. So some calcification is there, tortuosity is not there, previous point is not there, so it's a 2, and 2 means difficult. Anyways, so now we come back to chat, then we show you another case, another angiographic film. So the latest question is, if we have visible thrombus, then can we use export catheter first? So we'll come back to the first case. If you have a visible thrombus there, like in our patient, so the first step is always, you have to pass a wire, and after passing the wire, then you can do a balloon, or you can perform export catheter use. But the thing is, in the guidelines, the export catheter use is only for bailout. That means when you have done other maneuvers like balloon dilatation, use of GP2B3A, use of nitrates, when these things have been applied, but the TIMI flow or the visible thrombus burden is significantly present there, then we use the export catheter. So currently its role is only as a bailout, as a rescue. Primarily, most of the operators, they do not use export catheter. But after balloon dilatation, if you see a thrombus burden is there, yes, you can use. You have to be flexible in your approach. You can use export catheter. Okay, the other question from Dr. Arif is that CTO in a stable patient after 24 hours, should we go for intervention? So this is basically a mix of 2 questions. I would say, in our case, the patient, he had an ATO, acute total, not a CTO. And his history, basically, as you already know, that he had an MI and then he again had recurrent symptoms and he was admitted due to that. So probably after first thrombolysis, he had partial recannulation of the vessel, and again he got that vessel later on again got occluded, and then again he had a recurrent MI. So in a recurrent MI, you almost always go for a PCI. Ideally, primary or rescue PCI should be there. It's not available, so as soon as possible, revascularization should be done, especially in a very dominant proximal region of the right coronary artery in this case. Regarding CTO, so yes, there have been debate that whether there is benefit of doing CTO interventions or not. So coming to that question, there is up till now, the trials and studies have proven that there is no mortality benefit of doing a CTO, but there is significant improvement in the symptoms and morbidity, and some studies have even shown that there is improvement of the LV. But in order to proceed on a CTO vessel, either the patient must have refractory symptoms which are not being controlled on maximum medications, or there should be objective evidence in those patients who, when the patient having some symptoms and on the angiographic film, you see that RCA or LAD, one of the vessel is a CTO vessel, and you want to justify your intervention, you just go for nuclear scan or stash echo, and if the result turns out to be having a significant irreversible ischemia, then again you should proceed with the intervention of the CTO. Another question is, so I think we can now show the next page, and if you have other questions, meanwhile you can You can post those questions. There is one comment, not question, one comment on the use of evaluated that its use is a bit controversial. It's okay. Most of the cases as we do, we are comfortable with heparin. I like to show you one case which is important, which can come in exam, at least can come in two. So this is an angiographic film of a 30-year-old female. You can see on the top of the screen, the patient's name is there, and I am trying to hide that. The age written over there is 30. Over here you can see. She is a 30 years lady with no major risk factors. She is not pregnant and did not have a recent delivery or use of OCPs. She presented with inferior wall ST elevation MI. There was the elevation in the lead 3 that was more than lead 2, that makes likely RC a culprit, and you can see the left system is clean. There's mild irregularity in the proximal LED. Otherwise, there's no obstructive disease of thrombus, and we'll come to the right coronary artery. So, what do we see and how we define this lesion and what next we will do? So, Dr. Vyas again.
So this is an angiogram of a 30-year-old woman done through a femoral route. The RC is engaged via TNF catheter. The RC is a moderate caliber vessel, and proximally there is a long segment of moderate stenosis, and the rest of the vessel is normal. There is no significant disease in the rest of the vessel.
So, how you define or label this lesion and how would you proceed?
As the patient is a 30-year-old woman, I will low probability of having large rupture, so I would like to proceed with the intravascular imaging to see the significance and to see if there is any dissection in the vessel.
So you want to see any dissection. So what's that entity called? How do you label it?
So spontaneous coronary artery dissection.
So very good. So SCAD, a spontaneous coronary artery dissection, is an area of interest for the last few years, even in the West. So, and this term has recently gained a lot of popularity because this young patient presenting with such angiograms are being seen in an increased number, and the management is slightly different in this case. So if you do an IVUS or an OCT and you see that there is spontaneous coronary artery dissection, so what would be your management strategy in this woman with this RCA disease? Sorry, I would like to mention that this patient was also thrombolized, and the angiographic film was done next day, and this is the CD of the next day. And while the angio was being done, this patient was now having stable symptom, and there was no arrhythmia as a shock or anything.
If spontaneous coronary artery dissection is diagnosed on IVUS, then and the flow in the distal vessel is free flow. So I would like to put the patient on anticoagulation so that there is no thrombus formation on the area of dissection. And this will be my only management right now. So it will be conservative.
So that's good in spontaneous coronary artery dissection with good kidney flow and stable hemodynamics. It heals spontaneously with time to lead to no any triggering or aggravating underlying factor, and intervention with putting in stents is usually not needed in these cases. That's adequate reply. So what are the types of SCAD and how you identify them? That's the next question.
So I don't remember the spontaneous. There are three types. You don't remember?
Well, good. There are certain classifications to define the types of SCAD. So you have one of them is type 1, 2, and 3 SCAD. And in type 1 SCAD, spontaneous dissection, there are presence of multiple channels which we see commonly in our primary TCN lab. And this is a bit more common type 1 in which the disease segment shows multiple channels or multiple intraliminal filling defects. The type 2 and type 3, and there's sometimes the type 2 is itself divided into type 2A and type 2B. So in those cases, there is, after SCAD, there is compression of the true lumen, and on angiographic film, you only see narrowing of the lumen like in this case. So that's the difference between type 1 and type 2. And the other thing is in type 2A, the difference between type 2A and B is the diffuseness of the disease. In type 2A, this narrowing or decrease in the diameter of the lumen that continues up to the distal vasculature, and in type 3 it's more of a focal process. But again, I would like to revise the diagrammatic or the angiographic appearance of this type 1, 2, and 3, and I also recommend the candidates to review that because I reviewed that some while ago. So I would like that all of you review the types of spontaneous corneal dissection, how you differentiate or how you identify on the angular film. So before we end our today's discussion of the case, there are some more questions. We would like to read those questions. There's one question: use of Drofiben for 24 to 48 hours in ATO before PCI. If a significant thrombus burden is there, the IVGP2B3A, they are very good and excellent drugs. We agree that as the thrombus grows old, it responds less to thrombolytics, anticoagulants, or GP2B3A inhibitors. But if significant thrombus burden is there, the use of GP2B3A practically, and while we are doing our cases, we see that they help in improving the TIMI flow and improving the acute result. And you know that long-term patient patency of the stents, they are very much dependent on acute results. So I would say yes, if significant thrombus burden or slow flow or microembolization is there, in addition to using intracoronary vasodilator, the use of IV GP2B3A bolus plus infusion, they do help. And yet they usually do not do any harm until you have a large femoral excess. If there's a risk of bleeding, you should avoid, otherwise they are good drugs. Next question is, after treating covered lesion, can we stress test for lesion in other arteries? Yes, we stress test and at what time? So this is basically a generalized question that after treating culprit lesion, what we do to the other arteries. So the general practice is, if you only do the culprit lesion on the index procedure, the other arteries, if they are significantly slow, like more than 70%, most of the operators, they would like to do a stage procedure on those lesions. If any intermediate lesions are there, then there are two approaches. After fixing the culprit vessel, you can do IFR, that is one approach, or FFR on the other non-culprit vessels. And if they are significant, fix them there. Or if you do not want to do an IFR or FR, or it's not available, the intermediate lesions are there, then you can do a staged stress testing to see the significance of those lesions, and then we fix those lesions. Okay. And which type of stress you will use? Stress nuclear scan or stress echo, both of them are fine. If exercise element that is added, that's good, because that's more physiological. Is the role of upstream GP2B3A? So from upstream, previously the upstream GP2B3A meant that the patient has presented with ACS, and before taking to the cath lab, you start him on the GP2B3A before defining the anatomy. But currently, that's not a very favored practice. Currently, first of all, you define the anatomy, and after defining the anatomy, like in this case, if you know that you have to do percutaneous intervention on those cases, then you start with GP2B3A. The problem with starting the GP2B3A without defining the anatomy, the major problem is, for example, if your patient turns out to be a surgical patient and you are not planning to do an intervention right there and then. So
Okay, आवाज आ रही है?
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the interruption. We had, I think, some disconnection of the internet probably. So in the end, I would like to say thank you, especially to Dr. Awais, because he spared his time. Currently, in this duration when your exams are very close, he spared at least 3 or 4 hours for preparing this case and voluntarily presenting himself for this online presentation. So if any feedback from the candidates is there, you can still send your text, and you can send on my number as well. And hopefully we would have another discussion on some long case in the next week as well. And thanks to Formulo, and thanks to all the participants. Allah Hafiz.